Good morning again and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum President's Day Festival. I'm Kennedy Library Forum Producer Liz Murphy, and it's now my great honor to introduce our guest for this next segment, third President Thomas Jefferson. Mr. President, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest.
Welcome. How are you? Welcome. My pleasure. Enchanté. My pleasure indeed. Oh, delightful to be here. Delightful to be back in Boston. Many people do not realize that I have been through Massachusetts twice throughout my life thus far. Of course, the very first time was when I thought that I would be able to meet Mrs. Adams up here, to come all the way up from Virginia and meet Mrs. Adams. We hope to meet on the 4th of July in 1784, and then we would sail together where? We would sail across the Atlantic Ocean to France. Absolutely. She had not seen her husband for several years, and I, of course, had been commissioned to be our nation's second minister plenipotentiary to succeed whom? Do you remember who was our first minister plenipotentiary to the King of France? Benjamin Franklin, absolutely. Well, you can never tell a horse what time you want to arrive. So by the time I arrived here in Boston, I arrived on the 4th of July. Mrs. Adams wouldn't wait for me. No, she had left about a week or so earlier. She was already at sea because she was worried maybe I would not arrive on time. So I booked a packet ship the next day, and I sailed out of Boston on the 5th of July in 1784, and I would be in France then for 5 delightful years. My heavens, I came to love those people so very much. It became my second home, but I doubt that I may have time to return. However, let us not forget that our American Revolution would have never been successful, no, without the aid of France. Absolutely. So this is a delight to be able to return to Boston for the third time, because the second time was not really here in Boston, but in Western Massachusetts, when Mr. James Madison and I were returning from a trip that we made up to Vermont. We wanted to go up and investigate the new state of Vermont. It had just entered our union, and also we had a scientific interest. When the Hessian mercenaries came over here to support Great Britain during our American Revolution, they brought with them a pesky little fly known as the Hessian fly that began to devour all our corn crops up through New England and all the way down through our new nation to the south. So both Mr. Madison and I had not only a political interest to journey up into England, we also had a scientific interest. And when we left Vermont, we came back to Virginia first by way of the Connecticut River, which is western in Massachusetts. So this is a pleasure to be here once more, particularly to visit with so many of you who are gathering together to appreciate what I hear is President's Day. What a delight that we might have a day set aside to recognize our presidents. I'm very much in favor of it, though I never have been too much in favor of anything said so much about me, because I've always thought that the true regard should be given to our nation. And when people say, well, Mr. Jefferson, we need to celebrate your birthday, I say, no, no, no. If any birthday is to be celebrated, it ought to be July the 4th. Many consider it to be the birthday of our nation, though I will tell you Mr. Adams has a disagreement with me on that one. I can understand it. Mr. Adams and I have several disagreements, but I'll tell you this, where would the two of us be more free upon this entire globe than we are here in our nation to hold a difference of opinion? And yet to realize as Americans, a difference of opinion ought never be a difference of principle. Mr. Adams reminds me of the founding principle of our nation, that day when we voted for independency. Anyone know what day that was? Mr. Adams says, never forget it. We should remind ourselves every year with masked bands, bonfires, parades, illumination. July the 2nd, the true birthday of our nation. And then, of course, we had to argue and debate something else so the rest of the world would understand what we had done. We had to argue and debate our Declaration of American Independence. That was no less of an attention in proper parliamentary procedure and rule of law for a civilized people. Now that we had written this down, now that we had difference of opinions on this, that we would follow that principle of open and free debate, and finally, the vote on our declaration, which succeeded on what day? July the 4th, 2 days later. And that seems to be the day that everyone celebrates the birth of our nation. But so be it, because this is how the rest of the world will continue to understand what we have done, not only on behalf of ourselves, but what we have done on the family, for the family of man across the globe. The inherent right of every individual to self-government. The inherent right of every individual to equal and exact justice. That is democracy. That is the inherent right of a people to have a word, to have a difference of opinion in how they wish to be governed. And yet to realize in that difference of opinion that the rule of law must be followed, proper parliamentary procedure as we referred to it as Englishmen. This, of course, makes me reflect as I come up here into Boston, here the second time in Boston, the third time in Massachusetts, with respect to this year that I have come to visit with you, this so-called President's Day in this year of 24. It is 24, is it not? 1824. Well, now, citizens, I was not here. I was not here in 1724. I'm not going to live to see 1924. So is it not the history? Is it not the context that brings you here on a President's Day to celebrate our presidents within their particular times, let alone the same day to celebrate the presidents of your time and those who will follow? Because one of the founding principles of our nation is that rotation in office, new ideas, new blood, to more successfully represent the people, the population of our nation. You know, as I arrive here this year, 1824, I cannot help but think, mercy, very soon, in 2 years, what year will it be? 1826, absolutely, and that will signify what? The 50th anniversary of our nation. 50 years. Can you imagine that we've succeeded for 50 years? Imagine what you've seen. But then reflect for a moment. Imagine what I have seen prior to that 50 years. There are not many of us left. Thank heaven for Mr. Adams here, still, the Adams in Boston. Those of us who remember what it was like more than 50 years ago, when no matter who you were or where you were from, we were born and we grew up Englishmen. English habits, English customs, English laws. Do you know a young English boy would never, ever have been taught, nor would have been looked upon as being well-mannered if he approached anyone and shook their hand? Oh, no, that was very, very un-British. No, you were taught to do what? Anyone? I doubt there are very few who may remember. Yes? Bow. You were taught to bow. You would bow at a distance. Do you know, even after we became a new nation, President Washington would often bow. I very rarely remember him shaking hands. So habits and customs, they do not change so easily, nor do particular laws either. But we were doing a remarkable thing when we got together to declare our independency. And you know what the first remarkable thing we did was? This was before the Declaration was argued and debated, before we voted for independency. Anyone remember nearly 50 years ago what we achieved that England never ever wanted to have happen? Pardon me? No. No. We brought 13 individual nations together. E pluribus unum. We all came together in Philadelphia, midway between the North and the South, in that largest city in North America, in that city of churches where freedom for religion had long reigned, in that city of a system of public schools, in that city that witnessed the first slave emancipation society in North America. Remember, before that, we were 13 individual nations. That's what we were, arguing, bickering one with the other, differences of religious opinion in one versus a vast difference in the other, the number of freeholders living in one versus the greater number of tenants living upon the freeholdings in the other, and there was the enslaving of man in every single one of them. And that is how England wanted to keep it. Remember why? Because as we would argue and debate amongst ourselves, well, then that kept us apart. We could never think of coming together, and that kept England happy, because all we had to do was look at our ledger books and where was the money going? And there you are. No, citizens, never forget the one unique thing that we were able to do that England did not want us to do was to come together. E pluribus unum. Bring 13 individual nations together. It's common sense. 2 heads are better than 1, 3 heads better than 2, 13 heads collectively. Better than any below that. E pluribus unum. And how did we do it? This is what democracy is all about. This is what arguing, debating, and voting is all about. We did it through the founding principle of compromise. Compromise. On behalf of the common safety, on behalf of the common defense, most importantly, compromise on behalf of the common good. Everyone will ultimately benefit in union. No, it does not happen overnight. You have to keep working at it. And that is what we must continue to do. Work at what we began with the American Revolution. And by that I mean, in this year 1824, as I have arrived, well, what else does this particular year represent? Another presidential election. Is it not a presidential election year? 1824. I can tell you one thing. My friend President Monroe said he will not accept a third term. Many people say, yes, he could be elected for another 4 years. They have been calling his terms an era of good feelings. Well, of course, that depends upon with whom you're speaking. But no, President Monroe says he is going to stand on principle and not accept a third term. What do you think he means by that? A founding principle. It's not really written down. Well, who could have been president for life? General Washington. Do you know he did not even want to stand for a second term? He had enough after 4 years. I had to ride to Mount Vernon and convince him. Our experiment is young, it's new. The North and the South rest upon your shoulders, looking to your head for our guidance. Oh, thank heaven he did serve for another 4 years, but then after that, he had it. And he gave up the power of lofty office to retire under his own vine and fig. Many of us said, this is remarkable. He is a modern Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus, you know, was the Roman general who had provided many victories during the days of the ancient Roman Empire. But then he'd had enough after what he was able to accomplish, and he gave up the sword in preference for the plow. And do you know, when King George III of England heard that President George Washington would not accept a third term, anyone know what he said? If this is true, George Washington is the greatest man who ever lived. So here we are, 1824. We have no idea who will be the presidential candidates, not as yet, but we have much to think about as to where we've been, where we are, and where we need to continue to go. And this is what I want to mention in just a few moments that I have left, because I would rather hear from you, your questions and your concerns of where we've been, where we are, and where we can go, so that on this President's Day, I can give you an idea from my history and the context of my times, of my opinion thereupon. In this year, 1824, I'm sorry to say that we still remain no different than what the ancients would call an old Roman republic. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, who was on the committee to help draft our Declaration of American Independence, remember? Anyone remember how many members were on the committee? Appointed by President Hancock. Remember, this was a work by committee. It was not just one single individual to write his own opinion. Remember the other four? Well, from Massachusetts, John Adams. From Connecticut, Roger Sherman. From New York, thank you, Robert R. Livingston. I later appointed him minister plenipotentiary to sail to France and negotiate with General Bonaparte for the purchase of, yes, New Orleans and Louisiana. Thank you, dear. And then, of course, Dr. Franklin was from Pennsylvania, and one other? Yes. I was the only one on the committee south of the line drawn by Messrs. Mason and Dixon. Everybody else was from up north. And remember, I was one of the youngest in the Continental. I was only 33 years old when they were asking me to write that. Who do you think we wanted to write it for the very first? Of all of us, when we came together, all five of us, whom do you think we thought should be the author? Franklin. Oh, Adams, yes. Well, Adams, I thought he should be the author, but Adams thought he was not very well liked and they might not have accepted it. But remember, Adams was the one who really helped to bring us all together to begin with. No, we looked at Dr. Franklin. He was our mentor. He had been living in London a good 17 years, pleading our cause before he came back here. And can you imagine this? In 1776, Benjamin Franklin was 70 years old. Yes, holy moly, is right. He had not even been to France yet. He had not even attended the Constitutional Convention to be held in Philadelphia in September 1787, when he would be 81 years old. Can you imagine someone serving in government for all of those years, 81 years old? Well, listen, let me tell you, are they not the ones with the greatest experience? Are they not the ones with the greatest knowledge? I'm not, no, leave it. I leave it unto you. I leave it unto you. But both Mr. Adams and I are approaching our autumn years, and we can tell you a lot of our history and what it took to begin this nation and to continue to keep it. And that is what Dr. Franklin said. When we accomplished creating our new nation, he said, we have created a republic if we can keep it. But that's the point. There's a difference between republic and democracy. This is the point I want to get together. Yes, our Declaration is our founding document. Here are all of our principles in our Declaration. It also reminds us of where we've been, because there are all of the grievances that we put down here to remind us that we were told the greatest of our rights as Englishmen was to petition for redress of grievances. We'd petition till the cows would come home, and it never went anywhere. Anyone remember why? We were not represented. We had no representation in Parliament. Imagine the first two paragraphs pronounces the inherent right of every individual to equal, exact justice and self-government. So the second part of our Declaration reminds us of what it is like when you are not represented in government. But this is not law. If it were law, we would be well on the way by this year of 1824 to make certain everyone here would have a voice in our government. No, President Washington referred to it as our promise. And he referred to our Constitution as the guarantee of our promise. And it's that guarantee that continues our American Revolution. What is the first words in our Constitution? Very first words. We the people. Wonderful. Who here would think they're the less represented in that first line than anyone else? There it is. That's democracy. That's what we're working towards. But listen, as I represent my time right now, 1824, who in this room will not be able to vote or even be elected to public office? Raise your hands high. Women, no vote, no voice. Who else? Not only the enslaved, anyone of color. Anyone of color. The natives of this land have no vote, no voice. Anyone of a particular hue from a foreign land who has every right to come here, just as you all, no vote, no voice. Imagine this. Here we are, gentlemen, a white male, 21 years of age or older, who does not hold property. No vote, no voice. A white male, 21 years of age or older, who holds property but is mortgaged. I don't care to know who you are. But it's not your property. It belongs to your creditor, and your creditor may be a wealthy woman of color. No matter her wealth, she still does not have a vote or a voice. So the only one I've ever known, the only one I may ever know, to have a vote or a voice and be elected to public office in our nation is the white male freeholder, 21 years of age or older. That is the franchise in all of our 24 states. In our population now, 9,600,000. That's what the census 4 years ago, 1820, reveals. And that franchise represents less than 6% of our population. Citizens, does that franchise this year, 1824, represent that first line in our Constitution? There's our work. There is our work. The American Revolution continues. And that is why to have a firm idea of where we've been gives us a better understanding of where we are. And in my opinion, what will help us move forward on behalf of the inherent right of every individual is what I've been working for, Mr. Adams has been working for, even the late General Alexander Hamilton was working for it, and we had great differences of opinion. What will help bring us forward for that opportunity for every individual is an education. An education to understand that responsibility, let alone the inherent right that is given to us. Because I'll tell you, on the morning of the 5th of July, when many people saw this first printing, it's called a broadside, like a page out of a newspaper. I will never forget in Philadelphia City that when many were handed this, they gazed upon it curiously, they shrugged their shoulders, and they tossed it into the gutter. Not because they were Tory, simply because they could not read. They could not read. Citizens, I will tell you, when I was asked to take up the pen and write our Declaration, I realized I have to write this so it may be comprehended and understood. In the great diversity of our population, ever growing, the myriad of tongues coming from all over the globe to make one voice, I had to shed the lofty sophisms of ancient authors, explain it in clear and simple terms as an expression of the American mind. Something we understood then and something we must never forget. And that is simply that our nation grows as we, the people, grow. Our institutions grow as we, the people, grow, and that a child of 14 cannot wear the same clothes at the age of 40. We become the more American every day, do we not? Through these remarkable founding principles that signify democracy. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to explain things. I know I have a few moments for questions, as I promised you earlier. So you've allowed me the floor. The floor is yours. Any question you have, I'm more than happy to pursue. There's no such thing as an unworthy question. Yes, dear.
What was your relationship with Alexander Hamilton like?
What was my relationship with General Hamilton like? Have you ever been to Monticello?
I have not.
I wish you all to come to Monticello, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you'll have a delightful trip through our nation, that's for sure. As you venture down from Boston through Connecticut and New York and then Jersey and Pennsylvania, and then you go through, if you will, Delaware or Maryland, finally to Virginia. And when you walk in the front door of Monticello, it's a big hall, and you will see a large bust of me on the right. It's very large. I'm not very pleased with it. It was a gift. But if you look to the left, you'll see a beautifully carved bust of Alexander Hamilton right there in the entrance hall. When many people come in there, they're startled. They step back, and if I'm present, I say, yes, there the two of us will gaze across at one and the other in opposition throughout death as we have been in life. You know why? I've been talking about it. That is what we can do as Americans. Are we created the same in face and form? No. Did our Creator then create us the same in mind? Of course not. He revels in the difference of opinion, particularly the difference of opinion how we worship. And so therefore, General Hamilton and I both understood, though we represent the opposite ends of the dichotomy, that is, the difference of political opinion in the nature of man, man has never been more free in human history than he is now in our nation to argue and debate these differences. And what did General Hamilton and I do so many, many times in the difference of opinion? We argued, and then we compromised, absolutely compromised. We compromised. In fact, General Hamilton and I compromised over more than we ever disagreed over. Do you remember we saved our nation that spring of 1790 when the government was in New York? It could have been done at that, just imploded. Arguments over the Assumption Bill, arguments over the Banking Bill, arguments over the Residency Act, where we're going to place our nation. It would have been all over had not General Hamilton and I and Mr. Madison compromised and kept us together. Remember, General Hamilton believed that only the ports of our nation should be protected by revenue cutters. I said, well, what about the rest of the coastline? What about all of the coast owned by farmers? We need militia boats. We need defense boats. It would have been all over had we kept up our arguments. We came together, we compromised, and the two of us together founded the Coast Guard, our nation's Coast Guard. Remember when you were from Virginia and Pennsylvania or New York or Massachusetts, remember there were differences in the value of money. You had to keep changing your money every time you rode through one of those former colonies, and even when we became a new nation. You had to change up. No, we would have gotten nowhere. We need a stable currency. We need a foundation of monies the same value in every state. Do you know who accomplished that? Alexander Hamilton and me. We stabilized our currency, founded a standard of currency. He let me create the decimal system in tenths of 100. Now, I will tell you another thing we had to compromise over. He believed that we need a standing army and navy in times of peace. Now, citizens, look how blessed we already are. Nature has provided us several thousands of miles of ocean between us and those ancient tumults and colonies of European kingdoms. We need a standing army. My heavens, who's ever going to attack us? And if someone does, well, then that will rally the people. We'll all come together as a nation, and we'll thwart that attack. No, General Hamilton wanted a standing army. We would have gotten nowhere unless we compromised. So I said, I will accept the idea of a standing army. If you will accept the idea, they need to be led by a well-educated officer corps. And those officers need to be taught defense and fortification for our nation, not elements of aggression. So General Hamilton compromised with me, and when I was president, 1802, thank heaven, Alexander Hamilton was still living when as president I founded West Point. I founded our military academy. As I have said of Alexander Hamilton, as a man, he was honest. Imagine, the complete opposite end of the political spectrum. You knew exactly where one and the other stood, and you could trust one and the other in that recognition. He was honorable in his business. Now think about that. At the complete opposite end of the political spectrum, you could still conduct honorable business with him. And he was amiable in society, meaning everyone could get along with him, particularly the ladies. He was a colossus, a host unto himself. He did not even need a party. Yes, you had a question. Yes. I'm sorry, sir. How long did it take me to write our Declaration of American Independence? I remember distinctly. It took me 3 days. 3 days to write the Declaration on 4 sheets of paper. Now, why do you think it took me so long? I'll tell you, because I am guilty of something everyone in this room is guilty of. No, not procrastination. In fact, I have written, never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. Never put off till tomorrow. No, I'm guilty of something here. I make mistakes. Do you make mistakes when you write things? Yes. Is it easy to erase ink? No. So what I had to do, go back over my mistakes. I'd cross it out. I'd write the correction above or beneath. At the end of the day, I could not even read my own writing as I had. So that night, I'd stay up late and I'd write it clear and simple. I'd transcribe it perfectly. And then the next morning, I'd make more mistakes. So it took me 3 full days to get it just as I wanted to, and then, remember, proper parliamentary procedure, rule of law, it was out of my hands. I handed it to the larger delegate body, those 4 other gentlemen on that committee. So there you are. Do you enjoy writing? It's a wonderful, wonderful expression of your thoughts and what you read and study, to write things down. And think how wonderfully historic it can be. Because if you fold up what you've written, particularly your opinions and your experience, perhaps going home today and writing that we had a conversation together, fold it up, put it away, and who knows? Maybe many, 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 many years from now, the future will read what you have written, and for them, this moment will be just as real as we are experiencing it now. That is the beauty of writing. Writing for the future, and that is exactly for whom this was written. Other questions? These are wonderful questions here. Yes?
Where were you during the Revolutionary War?
I was predominantly in Virginia during the Revolutionary War. Now, as it began, remember, never forget, this is one of the great delights to come and visit Boston. Because if the American Revolution began anywhere,
Boston.
right here, December 1773, no longer would you tolerate the coercion to purchase the tea of one company over all others, when we were even denied as Americans to have our own tea companies. It began right here with that so-called Tea Party in Boston Harbor. And then within, wasn't even a year, when Virginia heard about the Crown closing down the port of Boston, we immediately offered our assistance. I, in fact, was part of the committee who drafted a proclamation for a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer, that on Sunday, June the 1st, when the monarchy would close down the entire port of Boston, punish all of the folks in Massachusetts Bay, in Virginia, we would go to church and pray on behalf of Massachusetts. And then look what else also continued the beginning of the American Revolution. That happened in Massachusetts. That happened in April of 1775. In fact, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year and the midnight ride. Lexington and Concord, folks, that began the American Revolution as well, happened right here in Massachusetts. And coincidentally, lest you forget, remember that was orders of the Crown to deprive the citizens of their government arms and gunpowder. Remember, the citizens had their own arms. They could have, no, but these were government arms that were removed, government gunpowder, because with that, the government was breaking its contract of protecting and defending the people. They were taking away that defense. So my point being that as the war began, though I had served in Philadelphia in 1775 and 1776, I then returned to Virginia, and I was elected the second governor of that new Commonwealth. And coincidentally, many people do not know this, I was also commissioned a colonel of Virginia militia. Colonel Thomas Jefferson. I still have 3 swords that I wore in that respect during the war, but I never saw any military activity because I was far too busy with the pen in administrative positions. Yes, sir.
My name is Russell. I'm here with Weston and Garrett from Seattle, Washington, and we consider you one of the greatest writers of all. We're here with Peter from Boston, and our question is, what other writings influenced how you wrote the Declaration of Independence? Particularly, did the Mayflower Compact influence what you wrote?
I'm happy to tell you that. Let me first ask a question that puzzles me, if you would allow. You are from where?
Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington. But I know...
It's a different world from
Well, the only Washington, well, I knew the general, of course, and then our federal city, the capital of our entire nation, is Washington City. There are various little teeny towns all throughout our various states, our major roadways, etc., that are named Washington. But you make it seem that this ancient Greek city, Seattle, is a name for a settlement in Washington. Where is the Washington you speak about?
It's in the wilds where the trees are large.
Well, the trees large around here.
On the other side.
You send some people.
How far west is it? Is it as far west as where I sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark?
It is.
It is? You mean it's out near the Columbia River?
It is, yes.
Where the Columbia meets the ocean?
Yes.
Well, that's Oregon, is it not?
North of there is a place so beautiful that you will want to visit.
Very well, but my question still is, why have you called it Washington? He had nothing to do with it. You could have called it Lewis. You could have called it Clark. I would not have been upset if you had called it Jefferson. I would think that would be nice. But to answer your question upon this subject, you heard me say earlier, there's nothing new or original in our Declaration of American Independence. In fact, I have written everything in it you may find in the elementary books of public right. The works of Aristotle, Cicero, Algernon Sidney, John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Paine, those authors, their works, each and every one of you have read and reread frequently, correct? No, you have not. No, you have not.
She has not yet mastered her
No, see, no. Well, do not worry about it, dear, because neither has anyone else here. Remember, that's what I was talking about. In 1776, many people could not even read. So that is why, as I mentioned earlier, my effort in taking up the pen was to shed the lofty sophisms of these ancient authors, explain it in clear and simple terms. Because remember, our nation did not begin from nothing. Nothing ever really begins from nothing. It began from so many civilizations, but particularly so many charters, not only the Mayflower Compact, but good heavens, what about Roger Williams' writings and those compacts of the Baptists and their interest to worship freely? What about the tenets and the charters of the Quakers' religion? What about the Jamestown Compact? You could call it a compact. That's what it was for that settlement, a corporate settlement nonetheless, in Virginia. So, and then there's the Great Charter of 12 and 15. And then there is the British Bill of Rights, good heavens, in the 16 and 80s. So much has come together before that has allowed us to bring that into more modern times, but not on behalf of a select people, not on behalf of solely the Puritans in their Mayflower Compact, not only on behalf of the members of the Church of England in that Jamestown Corporation. No, but so much has come together to make this the inherent right of every individual. So that's what we're working on, and you are absolutely right from everything in the past. Citizens, thank you for this opportunity. I could be in your company. I'm delighted to say that following me is going to be the gentleman of whom I've referred to several times already, your neighbor, your friend, the man who rallied us more than anyone else to bring us together in that First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, 1774. You know of whom I'm referring to. John Adams. He will be here shortly. I look forward to speaking with you throughout the rest of this delightful President's Day, and rest assured I ever remain your humble and obedient servant, Thomas Jefferson. Godspeed.